Queen Zara stood on the crystal balcony of her palace, watching the twin suns of Corvani Prime set behind the floating cities. Her skin glowed with soft blue light, energy crackling beneath the surface like captured lightning. She was the most powerful being in 3 star systems, able to level mountains with a thought and command fleets with her mind. Yet today, like many days before, she felt alone. The massive doors behind her opened with a gentle hiss. Ben walked onto the balcony carrying 2 cups of steaming tea. His brown hair caught the last rays of sunlight, and his simple gray clothes made him look ordinary compared to Zara's flowing robes of living metal. "You missed dinner again," Ben said softly, offering her a cup. His voice carried no judgment, only quiet concern. Zara accepted the tea, her glowing fingers wrapping around the warm ceramic. The council meeting ran long. General Crix wants to increase military spending again. He believes the Keth raiders are growing bolder. Ben nodded and stood beside her, looking out over the city. Far below, Corvani citizens moved through the streets like points of colored light, their bioelectric signatures creating patterns in the twilight. "What do you think?" "I think Crix sees threats everywhere because he enjoys war," Zara replied. She sipped her tea and felt some tension leave her shoulders. Ben always had this effect on her, this strange ability to bring peace to her chaotic thoughts. "But you're worried too," Ben observed. It wasn't a question. Zara glanced at her husband. After 2 years of marriage, he still surprised her with his ability to read her moods. The Corvani were not a subtle people. When they felt anger, their skin flared red. When they felt joy, golden sparks danced across their bodies. But Ben seemed to understand emotions that ran deeper than surface displays. 3 border colonies have gone silent in the past month, she admitted. Each time we find the same thing. Empty settlements, no bodies, no signs of struggle. Just silence. Ben was quiet for a long moment. In the distance, a transport ship lifted off from the spaceport, its engines leaving trails of blue fire across the darkening sky. "The Keth take prisoners," he said finally. "How do you know that?" Zara asked, turning to face him fully. Ben shrugged. "It's what I would do if I wanted to study my enemies. Learn their weaknesses before launching a real attack." The casualness of his response made Zara's energy flicker with unease. Sometimes Ben said things that reminded her how little she truly knew about humans. Her people had made contact with Earth only 50 years ago, and Ben was among the first humans to live permanently in Corvani space. "The Council thinks humans are weak," she said carefully. "They don't understand why I married you. Do you?" Ben asked, meeting her glowing eyes with his steady brown ones. Before Zara could answer, the sound of approaching footsteps interrupted them. General Crix emerged onto the balcony, his massive frame filling the doorway. His skin burned with aggressive orange light and electricity sparked between his fingers. Like most Corvani military leaders, he stood nearly 8 feet tall and could punch through steel with his bare hands. "My queen," Crix said, his voice rumbling like distant thunder. He barely glanced at Ben. "I apologize for the intrusion, but we've received urgent reports from the Outer Rim." Zara straightened, her royal bearing returning instantly. "What kind of reports?" "Keth ships have been spotted near the Tau Centauri mining stations. Not raids this time, a full battle fleet. At least 200 vessels." The teacup in Zara's hand began to crack as her energy output increased. "How long before they reach the core worlds?" "If they maintain current speed, 6 days. Maybe 7. Ben set down his cup and stepped closer to Zara. "What are the mining station's defenses like?" Crix finally looked directly at the human, his expression somewhere between amusement and contempt. "Nothing you would understand, little man. We're discussing real warfare, not the primitive conflicts of your backward planet." Zara felt Ben's hand gently touch her arm, a silent request for calm. She forced her energy levels to stabilize, though anger still simmered beneath her crystalline skin. "The stations have standard energy barriers and plasma cannons," she told Ben, ignoring Crix's disapproving rumble. "Each facility can defend against raiders, but not a fleet." "Are they evacuating the miners?" Ben asked. "Some," Crix said dismissively, "but we cannot abandon valuable infrastructure every time the Keth show their faces. We are not a species that runs from battle." Ben nodded slowly. "Of course not. But the miners aren't soldiers." "Neither are you," Crix replied sharply. "Yet you seem eager to offer military advice." The general's skin flared brighter, casting harsh shadows across the balcony. Several other Corvani had gathered in the doorway, drawn by the electrical discharge of Crix's anger. They watched Ben with expressions ranging from curiosity to open mockery. "Perhaps the human believes his soft words can stop Keth warships," one of them muttered, earning chuckles from the others. Ben remained perfectly still, his face showing no reaction to the insults. This only seemed to irritate the Corvani further. They were accustomed to displays of power, to enemies who met aggression with aggression. "What do you think we should do?" Zara asked Ben quietly. The question surprised everyone present. A few of the Corvani exchanged shocked glances. Even Crix's electrical discharge faltered for a moment. Ben looked thoughtfully at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "I think the Keth are smarter than we're giving them credit for, and I think they've been planning this for a very long time." He turned back to Zara, and something in his eyes made her breath catch. For just an instant, she saw depths in her husband that she had never noticed before, depths that suggested there was much more to Ben than anyone realized. "But mostly," Ben continued, his voice still soft and measured, "I think we're about to learn what humans are really capable of when people they love are threatened." The Keth fleet arrived 2 days earlier than expected. Zara stood in the war room, watching holographic displays show enemy ships emerging from hyperspace near the outer mining stations. Each vessel looked like a massive insect made of metal and bone, their hulls pulsing with organic patterns that seemed almost alive. 237 ships confirmed, reported Commander Vex, her fingers dancing across control surfaces that responded to her bioelectric touch. "They're moving in coordinated attack formations toward Mining Station Alpha." General Crix studied the tactical display with satisfaction. "Let them come. Our energy barriers will hold and our plasma cannons will tear them apart before they reach weapons range." Ben stood quietly near the wall, observing the proceedings. He had not been officially invited to the War Council, but Zara had requested his presence. Several military officers cast annoyed glances in his direction, clearly uncomfortable with a human witnessing their strategic discussions. "Station Alpha is reporting successful barrier activation," Vex announced. "All defensive platforms are online and ready." The main display zoomed in to show the mining station, a sprawling complex of refineries and habitation domes protected by a shimmering energy field. Plasma cannon turrets tracked the approaching Keth vessels, their barrels glowing with stored power. "First contact in 30 seconds, Vex said. The room fell silent as everyone watched the Keth ships enter weapon range. The station's cannons opened fire, sending brilliant streams of superheated plasma toward the enemy fleet. The energy bolt struck the lead ships and seemed to splash harmlessly across their hulls. Crix frowned. "Increase power to the cannons. Full intensity." "Power is already at maximum," Vex replied, her voice tight with concern. On the display, the Keth ships continued their advance without slowing. Their hulls rippled and shifted, absorbing the plasma fire like water soaking into dry ground. The organic patterns on their surfaces grew brighter, as if feeding on the energy being directed at them. "How are they doing that?" demanded Colonel Thrain, his skin flickering with nervous yellow sparks. Ben stepped closer to the display, studying the enemy ships carefully. "They're not just resisting your weapons. They're adapting to them." "Impossible," Crix snapped. "Energy is energy. There's no defense against sufficient plasma output." "The Keth return fire," Vex announced. Strange projectiles launched from the enemy ships, moving slowly compared to the Corvani energy weapons. They looked almost like living creatures undulating through space with purposeful motion. "What kind of weapons are those?" Thrain asked. The projectiles struck the station's energy barrier and stuck to it like parasites. Instead of exploding, they began to spread across the barrier's surface, creating dark patches that grew larger with each passing second. "The barrier is losing power," Vex reported, her voice rising with alarm. "Something is draining the generators." Ben moved to a secondary console and began calling up additional data feeds. His fingers moved across the controls with surprising familiarity, bringing up engineering readouts and power distribution charts. "How does he know how to operate our systems?" Colonel Thrain whispered to another officer. "The barrier is down," Vex shouted. On the display, the energy field around Mining Station Alpha flickered and died. The Keth ships immediately accelerated, closing the remaining distance in minutes. But instead of destroying the station, they deployed what looked like boarding pods. "They're taking prisoners," Ben said quietly. "We need to evacuate the remaining stations," Zara said, but Crix shook his massive head. Absolutely not. We don't retreat from inferior species. Deploy the fleet. All available warships are to engage the enemy immediately. General, Ben began, perhaps we should consider— You will be silent, Crix roared, his skin blazing with angry red light. This is a military matter, not a tea party for soft humans. Ben fell quiet, but Zara noticed his eyes never left the tactical displays. He was studying everything with intense focus, as if memorizing every detail of the Keth attack patterns. The Corvani battle fleet arrived 4 hours later. 50 of their most powerful warships, each one bristling with energy weapons and protected by barriers that could withstand planetary bombardment. General Crix himself led the attack from the flagship Stormbreaker. All ships open fire on my command, Crix's voice boomed through the war room speakers. The Corvani fleet unleashed everything they had. Energy beams that could crack moons struck the Keth ships in coordinated volleys. For a moment, it seemed like the organic hulls might finally yield to the overwhelming firepower. But the Keth ships began to change again. Their surfaces shifted and flowed, growing new structures that seemed designed specifically to counter the Corvani weapons. Within minutes, they were absorbing the energy attacks even more efficiently than before. They're learning, Ben said, his voice barely audible. Every time you attack, they get better at defending. Impossible, Thrain muttered, but his skin had gone pale blue with fear. The Keth fleet split into smaller groups, using tactics that confused the Corvani commanders. Instead of meeting the enemy head-on in traditional battle formation, they scattered and regrouped in unpredictable patterns. Their weapons, which had seemed primitive at first, proved devastatingly effective against energy-based defenses. Stormbreaker is taking heavy damage, Vex reported. Hull breaches on decks 12 through 15. Zara watched in growing horror as her fleet was systematically dismantled. The Keth weren't just winning. They were making it look easy. Every tactical advantage the Corvani possessed seemed to work against them. We need to withdraw and reassess, Ben suggested quietly. Corvani forces do not retreat. Crix's voice crackled through the communication system. Though his ship was clearly in distress, Ben approached the main tactical console, his movements careful and deliberate. Your Majesty, with your permission, I'd like to suggest an alternative strategy. The human thinks he can save us? Colonel Thrain laughed bitterly. What could you possibly know about warfare? Ben looked directly at Zara, ignoring the other officers completely. Trust me. Something in his voice made her pause. There was a weight to those 2 words that spoke of experiences far beyond what she had imagined. For the first time since she had known him, Ben sounded like someone who had faced desperate situations before and survived them. What do you have in mind? She asked. The other officers protested loudly, but Ben was already studying the tactical data with the focused intensity of a trained professional. His fingers moved across the controls with practiced efficiency, pulling up ship positions, weapon specifications, and enemy movement patterns. The Keth are fighting a different kind of war, he said, his voice taking on a tone of authority that silenced the room. They're not trying to destroy your fleet. They're trying to understand it. Every attack you make teaches them something new. He looked up at Zara, and she saw something in his eyes that took her breath away. This was not the gentle gardener who brought her tea and spoke of peaceful things. This was someone else entirely. If you want to win this war, Ben said, you need to stop fighting like Corvani and start fighting like humans. The Keth fleet broke through the outer defense line 6 hours after Ben's warning. By then, half of the Corvani warships were either destroyed or retreating in disorder. The enemy ships moved like hunting predators, adapting to every energy weapon fired at them. They've reached Corvani Prime's atmosphere, Commander Vex announced, her voice strained with exhaustion. She had been channeling bioelectric energy for hours, coordinating the defense, and her skin was beginning to dim. Ben watched the tactical display with growing concern. The Keth weren't just attacking military targets anymore. Their ships were descending toward population centers, clearly planning ground assaults. All available personnel to battle stations, General Crix ordered over the communication system. Prepare for planetary defense. Zara turned to her war council, but most of the officers were showing signs of severe energy depletion. The Corvani fighting style required enormous amounts of bioelectric power, and sustained combat drained them quickly. How long before our forces need to rest? Ben asked. Colonel Thrain wiped sweat from his brow, his skin flickering weakly. Most units will need at least 8 hours to recharge. We've been at full combat intensity for too long. The Keth won't give us 8 hours, Ben said quietly. He studied the enemy movement patterns on the display. They're timing their ground assault perfectly. They know exactly how your biology works. Zara felt a chill of understanding. They've been studying us. All those missing colonists from the border worlds, not just studying, Ben replied. They've been learning how to fight a war of attrition against energy-dependent species. The palace shook as Keth landing craft touched down in the capital city. Through the windows, they could see strange organic shapes moving through the streets searching for targets. Security teams report contact with enemy forces in the lower districts, Vex announced. Heavy fighting near the government complex. Ben stood up and moved toward the door. I need to see the armory. Where do you think you're going? Thrain demanded. To help, Ben said simply. You're a human. Crix's voice boomed through the speakers as his damaged ship limped back toward the planet. You have no energy weapons, no bioelectric abilities. You'll be dead within minutes. Ben paused at the doorway. Maybe, but I won't be tired. Zara followed him out of the war room, leaving the exhausted officers behind. They made their way through corridors filled with palace guards preparing for battle. Every Corvani they passed looked drained, their natural glow dimmed by hours of combat stress. The armory was a vast chamber filled with energy weapons, powered armor and combat equipment designed for Corvani physiology. Ben walked past all of it, heading for a section that contained older, more primitive tools. What are you looking for? Zara asked. Ben picked up a simple metal rod, testing its weight and balance, something the Keth haven't seen before. He grabbed a few more items, some wire, a small explosive charge, and what looked like a broken piece of communication equipment. Zara watched in confusion as he began assembling them together with practiced movements. You've done this before, she observed. Yes, Ben admitted, not looking up from his work. Different war? Same principles. Within minutes, he had created what appeared to be a crude projectile weapon. It looked primitive compared to the sleek energy rifles surrounding them, but Ben handled it with obvious familiarity. The Keth adapt to energy attacks, he explained. But they've evolved on a world where everything fights with bioelectric power. They won't know how to counter kinetic weapons. Alarms began blaring throughout the palace as enemy forces breached the outer perimeter. Through the armory's communication system, they could hear reports of Corvani defenders falling back as their energy levels dropped. Captain Nex reports his unit is surrounded, came a voice over the speakers. They're too exhausted to maintain defensive barriers. Ben shouldered his improvised weapon and headed for the exit. Where are they? East Wing Level 3, Zara replied, following him despite her growing worry. They found Captain Nex and his squad pinned down in a corridor by 3 Keth warriors. The aliens moved with fluid grace, their adaptive armor shimmering as it absorbed the weakening energy blasts from the Corvani defenders. Ben studied the situation for a moment, then whispered instructions to Zara. When I move, have your people stop shooting and take cover. He sprinted down a side passage before she could object. Zara quickly relayed his message to the trapped soldiers, who looked at her with bewilderment but obeyed. The Keth warriors advanced confidently, expecting another volley of energy fire. Instead, Ben emerged from an unexpected angle and fired his kinetic weapon. The simple metal projectile punched through the lead alien's adaptive armor like it wasn't there. The Keth stopped in shock. Their armor, evolved to counter energy attacks, provided no protection against physical projectiles. Ben didn't give them time to adapt, firing twice more with mechanical precision. Impossible, Captain Nex whispered. How did you know that would work? Sometimes the old ways are better, Ben replied, already moving to collect materials for more improvised weapons. Over the next several hours, Ben moved through the palace like a ghost. While Corvani defenders rested and recharged their energy, he continued fighting. He showed small groups of soldiers how to create simple kinetic weapons from palace materials, how to use cover effectively, and how to fight when their bioelectric abilities were depleted. The Keth, who had seemed unstoppable against energy weapons, found themselves confused and vulnerable to human tactics. Ben's improvised weapons were crude but effective, and his unconventional strategies caught them completely off guard. He's been fighting for 18 hours straight, Zara told General Crix as they watched Ben train another group of exhausted soldiers. No rest, no energy recharge, no pause. Crix observed the human with new respect tinged with disbelief. How is that possible? Even we need to rest. I don't think we understand humans as well as we thought, Zara replied. Ben was demonstrating how to create explosive traps using common materials when the next wave of Keth forces arrived. This time they came in greater numbers, clearly frustrated by the unexpected resistance. They're adapting to our new tactics, Captain Nex warned. Ben nodded calmly. Then we adapt faster. He began teaching the Corvani something they had never learned, how to fight unpredictably. Instead of meeting force with force, they learned to retreat, regroup, and strike from unexpected directions. Ben showed them how human endurance could outlast alien adaptation, how persistence could overcome superior technology. As dawn broke over the battle-scarred city, the Keth forces found themselves facing an enemy they couldn't understand or counter. The Corvani had stopped fighting like energy-dependent warriors and started fighting like humans, and for the first time since the invasion began, the aliens were losing. The Keth response came at dawn. 3 massive assault ships descended directly toward the palace, their organic hulls bristling with new weapons designed to counter the kinetic tactics Ben had taught the defenders. They're learning too fast, General Crix muttered as he watched the enemy ships approach. His own forces were scattered throughout the city, most still recovering from energy depletion. Ben stood at the war room window, studying the approaching vessels with calculating eyes. They're not just learning, they're getting angry. Zara noticed something different about her husband's posture. The gentle gardener was gone, replaced by someone who moved with military precision. Ben, what aren't you telling me? He turned from the window, and for the first time since she had known him, Ben looked like a soldier. The Keth aren't the first alien species I've fought. Before anyone could respond, the palace shook under heavy weapons fire. Emergency lights flickered as the building's power systems struggled to maintain barriers against the assault. Direct hit to the east wing, Commander Vex reported. Structural damage to levels 4 through 7. Ben moved to the tactical display and began pulling up building schematics with practiced efficiency. We can't defend this position with conventional tactics. The palace is too big and we don't have enough people. Then what do you suggest? Zara asked. We make them come to us, Ben replied. His fingers danced across the control surfaces, highlighting specific areas of the palace structure. Channel their forces into corridors where their numbers won't matter. Colonel Thrain studied Ben's proposed defensive positions with surprise. This is advanced military planning. Where did you learn this? Ben was quiet for a moment, his eyes distant. The Titan Wars, Outer Rim conflicts most people never heard about. Zara felt her breath catch. The Titan Wars were legendary among military historians, a series of brutal conflicts that had raged across human space for decades. She had never known Ben was involved. How many tours? General Crix asked, his tone suddenly respectful. 7, Ben answered simply. Lost my entire unit in the last one. The room fell silent except for the sound of approaching enemy forces. Zara looked at her husband with new understanding. The quiet man who tended gardens and brought her tea was a veteran of humanity's most savage wars. Another explosion rocked the palace. Closer this time. Enemy forces have breached the main entrance, Vex announced. Ben moved toward the armory without hesitation. I need 20 volunteers who can still fight. Everyone else should evacuate to the lower levels. I'm not leaving, Zara said firmly. Neither am I, added Captain Nex. Despite his obvious exhaustion, within minutes, Ben had assembled a small force of Corvani defenders and palace guards. He distributed improvised weapons and explained his strategy with the calm authority of an experienced commander. The Kith fight like predators, he told them. They expect prey to run or make desperate stands. We're going to do neither. He led them through service corridors to predetermined positions throughout the palace. Each group had specific instructions on when to engage and when to retreat. Ben had turned the entire building into a trap. The first Keth assault team entered the main hall cautiously, their adaptive armor gleaming in the emergency lighting. They moved in perfect formation, weapons ready for energy attacks that never came. Instead, Ben's team struck from unexpected angles using tactics the aliens had never encountered. Hit-and-run attacks, delayed explosions, and coordinated retreats that drew the enemy deeper into prepared killing zones. How does he coordinate all of this without communication equipment? Colonel Thrain whispered to Zara as they watched Ben's forces work with mechanical precision. Experience, Zara replied, though she was equally amazed by her husband's tactical genius. The Keth, frustrated by their inability to adapt to human unpredictability, began making mistakes. They split their forces to cover more ground, exactly what Ben had been waiting for. "Now," he said quietly into his communicator. Explosions echoed through the palace as Ben's prepared charges cut off escape routes and separated enemy units. The Keth found themselves fighting isolated battles against defenders who appeared and disappeared like ghosts, but the aliens were learning, even from human tactics. Their second wave came prepared for guerrilla warfare, using different formations and moving more cautiously through the corridors. Ben adapted immediately, switching from ambush tactics to direct confrontation in areas where Corvani energy weapons could be most effective. He seemed to anticipate every enemy move, countering their strategies before they could fully develop. "He's thinking 3 steps ahead of them," General Crix observed with growing admiration. Zara watched her husband coordinate the defense with skills she never knew he possessed. This was not the gentleman she had married, but she realized it was still the same person. The qualities she loved about Ben, his patience and careful observation, were the same traits that made him a tactical genius. The battle reached its climax when Keth assault troops finally breached the war room itself. 3 heavily armored warriors burst through the reinforced doors, their weapons already adapting to counter the energy signatures they detected. Ben stepped forward calmly, drawing what appeared to be a simple metal blade from his belt. The Keth paused, confused by the primitive weapon. "Zara," Ben said quietly, never taking his eyes off the enemy. "You might want to step back." What happened next defied everything the Corvani thought they knew about human capabilities. Ben moved with lethal grace, his combat experience finally unleashed after years of peaceful gardening. The blade in his hands became a blur of motion, finding gaps in alien armor with surgical precision. The Keth warriors, adapted for energy combat, had no defense against a human martial artist who had survived the most brutal conflicts in galactic history. Within moments, all 3 lay motionless on the floor. Ben stood amid the fallen enemies, breathing steadily, his blade already cleaned and sheathed. He looked exactly like the man Zara had married, except now she understood what lay beneath his gentle exterior. "The wars changed me," he said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "I thought I could leave all of that behind." Zara approached him carefully, seeing her husband with completely new eyes. "Why didn't you tell me?" Ben met her gaze with the honest brown eyes she had fallen in love with. "Because I wanted to be the man you deserved, not the soldier I used to be." Outside, the sounds of battle were fading as the remaining Keth forces retreated in confusion. They had come expecting to fight energy-dependent aliens, not humans who had learned to wage war across the galaxy. "It's over," Ben said, finally allowing exhaustion to show in his voice. "For now." 3 weeks after the Keth retreat, Queen Zara walked through the palace training grounds where an extraordinary sight awaited her. 50 of her finest soldiers sat in a circle around Ben, listening intently as he explained human military philosophy. "Energy weapons make you powerful," Ben was saying, "but they also make you predictable. The Keth studied your power for years and learned to counter it. We need to teach you to fight in ways they can't anticipate." General Crix, who had once dismissed Ben as weak, now hung on every word. His massive frame was covered in bandages from the recent battle, but he had insisted on attending these training sessions. "Show us the endurance techniques again," Captain Nex requested. His own squad had been among the first to learn Ben's methods. Ben stood and demonstrated a series of breathing exercises that allowed humans to maintain peak performance for extended periods. The Corvani watched with fascination as he explained how mental discipline could overcome physical limitations. "Your people evolved to use massive energy bursts," Ben continued. "But that evolution also created a weakness. You burn bright and fast, then you need to rest. Humans learn to burn steady and long." Zara approached the group quietly, not wanting to interrupt. Over the past weeks, she had watched her husband transform the entire military structure of her empire. Word of his tactics had spread to every corner of Corvani space, and requests for human military advisors were pouring in from allied worlds. "The key is adaptation," Ben explained to his audience. "Every battle teaches you something new. Every enemy shows you a weakness you didn't know you had. The moment you stop learning is the moment you start losing." Commander Vex raised her hand. "What about our energy abilities? Should we abandon them entirely?" "Never," Ben replied firmly. Your bioelectric powers are incredible advantages when used properly, but they should be tools in a larger strategy, not your only option. He gestured to a nearby training dummy that had been modified with Keth-style adaptive armor. Watch this. Ben fired a simple kinetic projectile at the dummy. The armor began adapting immediately, hardening against physical impacts. But before the adaptation could complete, he switched to an energy weapon borrowed from one of the soldiers. The sudden change in attack type overwhelmed the armor's systems. Unpredictability, he said simply. Keep changing your approach faster than they can adapt. The soldiers nodded with understanding. They had seen this principle work in actual combat against the Keth, but watching Ben demonstrate it in controlled conditions made the concept clearer. Zara waited until the training session ended before approaching her husband. The other soldiers dispersed to practice what they had learned, leaving the royal couple alone in the training area. The Senate wants to make you an official military advisor, she told him. Ben picked up the practice weapons and began storing them properly. I'm honored, but I'm not sure that's what I want to be. What do you want? Zara asked, genuinely curious. After weeks of revelations about his past, she felt like she was getting to know him all over again. Ben paused in his work and looked directly at her. I want to be your husband who happens to know about military strategy, not a soldier who happens to be married to a queen. Zara felt warmth spread through her chest. Despite everything that had happened, despite the incredible skills he had revealed, Ben still prioritized their relationship above all else. The Keth will return, she said. Our intelligence reports suggest they're regrouping in the Outer Rim. I know, Ben replied. But when they come back, they'll face a different enemy. Your people are learning to fight like humans now. Persistence, adaptation, endurance. The Keth won't know what hit them. Over the following months, the transformation of Corvani military doctrine became legendary throughout the galaxy. Other species sent observers to study what they called the human integration protocol. The combination of Corvani energy weapons with human tactical thinking created a fighting force unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Ben established training centers on every major Corvani world. He taught not just military tactics, but the human philosophy of warfare. Never give up, always adapt, turn every disadvantage into a strength. The lessons resonated with young Corvani, who had grown up believing that raw power was the only path to victory. The changes went beyond military applications. Corvani scientists began approaching problems with human persistence, working for days or weeks on a single challenge instead of abandoning projects when initial energy bursts failed to solve them. Engineers learned to build systems that could adapt and evolve rather than simply overpowering obstacles. We've learned something important, Zara told the Galactic Council during a diplomatic meeting 6 months later. Power without wisdom is just destruction waiting to happen. Humans taught us that true strength comes from the ability to endure, adapt, and never surrender. The ambassador from the Centauri Federation leaned forward with interest. Are you saying humans are superior to other species? I'm saying humans complement other species in ways we never imagined, Zara replied. They possess qualities that evolution stripped away from the rest of us as we became more powerful, qualities we desperately need. When the Keth finally returned a year later, they brought twice as many ships and weapons specifically designed to counter every known Corvani tactic. They expected to find the same energy-dependent species they had studied and defeated before. Instead, they encountered an enemy that fought like humans. An enemy that refused to be predictable, refused to be broken, and refused to surrender no matter how hopeless the situation appeared. The Keth adaptation protocols evolved over millions of years, simply could not keep pace with human unpredictability merged with Corvani power. Ben stood beside Zara on the palace balcony as the defeated Keth fleet jumped to hyperspace in full retreat, the same spot where they had shared tea and watched the sunset before the war began. Do you regret anything? Zara asked, taking his hand. Ben considered the question carefully. I regret that it took a war for you to see who I really am, but I don't regret being here when you needed me. Zara squeezed his hand gently, her bioelectric energy creating warm sparks where their skin touched. You're not just the man I married. You're the future of what we can become. In the distance, construction crews were rebuilding the damaged sections of the capital city, using new techniques that combined Corvani energy manipulation with human engineering persistence. It was a fitting symbol for their transformed civilization. The galaxy is going to be very different from now on, Ben observed. Better, Zara agreed, because now we understand that the strongest force in the universe isn't energy or technology, it's the refusal to give up. They stood together watching the stars, two beings from different worlds who had found something greater than either could achieve alone, the quiet human and the powerful alien queen, partners in a new kind of strength that would reshape the galaxy forever.